A new note arrived on day 65. Not to Nancy Guthrie's family, not to the FBI, to TMZ, and the note claimed the sender knows where the body is. Before we go any further, this channel is not going to treat that claim as confirmation of anything. Unverified communications are not evidence of the events they describe. What this video is going to do is examine something that almost every behavioral analyst covering this case has been circling around without saying directly enough: the timing. Because April 6, 2026 is not a random date. It is the 65th day of this investigation. And it is the first day Nancy Guthrie's daughter, Savannah, returned to the NBC Today show after 64 days away, 64 days of absence. Then Savannah is back on live national television in front of millions of people. On the first morning, she has returned to her public life. And on that same day, a new note appears. That is the detail I want to sit with for the next 20 minutes. Because when you apply behavioral analysis to the full communication record in this case, not just the April 6th note, but every communication since February 2nd, a pattern forms. And the pattern does not look like ransom. If you've been following this investigation and you want to be notified the moment something breaks, subscribe right now. I'm covering every development on this case as it happens, and what I'm about to lay out is something I haven't seen stated clearly anywhere else. Let me start with what we know for certain about the communication record, because this analysis only works if the foundation is solid. On February 2nd and 3rd, ransom notes arrived at TMZ and at 2 Tucson television stations. Those notes demanded payment in Bitcoin. They contained specific details about the interior of Nancy Guthrie's home, details that were not public. They set two payment deadlines, February 5th and February 9th. The FBI subsequently confirmed that those notes originated from the actual kidnapper or kidnappers. That confirmation is significant. The FBI does not make that determination lightly. Those notes are real, and those notes contained something that had not been publicly disclosed until recently: an explicit death threat. Not just a demand. A threat that Nancy would be killed if the family didn't pay. Both deadlines passed. No payment was made, or at least no payment that satisfied whatever the kidnappers were tracking. No further communication from that stream followed. Separately, a second stream. An informant, someone claiming to know who the kidnappers are and where they operate, began contacting TMZ starting in early February. This informant communicated more than 6 times. They claimed Nancy died sometime in the first week, between Tuesday and Wednesday. They asked for Bitcoin payment, roughly $70,000, a fraction of the public reward, in exchange for the location and the identity of the kidnappers. The FBI attempted to trace these communications. They spent hours at TMZ's servers. They came up empty. The informant stream is unconfirmed. Then weeks of silence. Then April 6th. A new note arrives at TMZ. The sender claims to know where the body is. Here is the logical problem that creates. Ransom communication has a specific operational logic. The living hostage is the leverage. Every communication in an active ransom situation serves that leverage. Demand, deadline, pressure, proof of life, consequence for non-payment. All of it is designed to move the family toward paying. The leverage only works because the hostage is alive. The moment you claim to know where a body is, you have announced the end of your own leverage. You have ended the transaction. A ransom communicator does not voluntarily destroy their leverage. Leverage is the product. Destroying the product ends the payment. Payment is the objective. So if the April 6th note came from the actual kidnapper, it is not a ransom communication. It has moved outside the operational logic of ransom entirely. And if it didn't come from the kidnapper, if it came from the informant, or from a third actor altogether, the question becomes the same question regardless of source. Why April 6th? Let's examine 3 patterns in the communication record that individually are notable and together are something more than that. The first pattern is audience selection. Every communication in this case went to media. not to the family. Not to a private channel designed to move a transaction forward quietly, TMZ, 2 Tucson television stations, and now TMZ again on April 6th. In documented kidnapping cases, the first negotiation contact goes to the family privately. You create a closed channel. You minimize law enforcement exposure. You maximize the family's incentive to pay quietly without involving more people. Public communication does the opposite. It generates law enforcement pressure, which reduces the probability of payment and increases the probability of arrest. A professional kidnapping operation does not voluntarily maximize its own law enforcement exposure. The consistent choice to send communications to media rather than to the family is a pattern, and patterns in communication behavior tell you something about the purpose behind the communication. These communications are not designed to initiate a private transaction. They are designed to produce a specific kind of public impact. The second pattern is the silence architecture. In an active ransom situation, weeks of silence after missed deadlines typically produce one of two things: escalation, new threats to pressure the family back toward compliance, or abandonment. The operation shuts down because the risk-reward calculation has shifted. What does not happen in an active or recently abandoned ransom operation is weeks of silence, followed by a new communication that contains no payment demand, no deadline, no mechanism for engagement. The silence followed by the April 6th note does not fit either the escalation pattern or the abandonment pattern. It fits a different pattern, a communication strategy that is responsive to something outside the internal clock of ransom negotiation. Something in the environment of the case changed. Something that made April 6th the right day to send a new note. The third pattern is the language shift. The original notes used ransom language, amounts, deadlines, consequences, the mechanics of financial leverage. The April 6th note uses different language entirely. Not a demand, not a deadline, a claim. The sender knows where the body is. That shift from payment demand to body location language is not a natural evolution of a ransom communication. In a genuine ransom scenario where the hostage has died, the operational logic would produce silence or a completely different kind of contact. It does not produce a calm announcement to a media outlet containing no mechanism for payment. The shift is from operational communication to something else, to messaging. And messaging, unlike operational communication, is not governed by the internal logic of the transaction it appears to be part of. It is governed by the desired impact on the person receiving it. Those three patterns together, audience selection, silence architecture, language shift, produce a single analytical conclusion. This communication, and possibly the full communication record in this case, has not been operating under ransom logic. It has been operating under a different logic. The logic of messaging to a specific audience for a specific purpose. And if you're finding this analysis useful, if this is the kind of investigation that makes you look at a case differently, subscribe to the Obscure Report and turn on notifications. I'm watching the behavioral record accumulate in real time, and the next development in this case will be covered here the moment it breaks. Now let me walk through 3 scenarios for what the April 6th communication actually represents. Scenario 1. The note came from the actual kidnapper or kidnappers, and the timing is coincidental with Savannah's return to television. What this explains well, if the Bitcoin address in the April 6th note matches the address in the original confirmed notes, that establishes consistent sourcing. A new communication from the same actor. The body location claim could reflect a genuine change in the situation's status. Where this scenario encounters difficulty, a genuine kidnapper operating under the internal clock of ransom negotiation does not select April 6th as a communication date based on a news event. April 6th only has operational significance if the communicator is tracking Savannah Guthrie's public schedule as a relevant variable. An actor whose primary motivation is financial does not monitor television schedules as part of their operational timing. Additionally, the language. A kidnapper who announces body location has ended their leverage. What is the operational objective of ending your own leverage? There is none that serves the financial goal. There is one that serves a different goal. Scenario 2. The note came from the informant stream, which has been operating on its own timeline separate from the kidnapper stream. The informant had previously claimed Nancy died in the first week. A body location claim is consistent with that prior communication. And the April 6th timing, the day the case would receive maximum media attention because of Savannah's return to national television, would maximize the visibility of the informant's message and potentially increase pressure on the investigation to engage with the informant's demands. Where this encounters difficulty, the informant's communications have been untraceable. Their credibility is unconfirmed, and the body location claim remains unverifiable without the specific information the informant says they will provide only in exchange for payment. The informant stream's entire operational design is built around withholding the useful information until payment is received. A body location claim sent to TMZ with no payment mechanism attached does not advance that design. Scenario 3. The note came from a different actor entirely. Not the kidnapper, not the informant. Someone for whom Savannah Guthrie's return to national television on April 6th was the primary variable in the timing decision. What this explains well: the timing. Precisely. The behavior of choosing April 6th as the communication date requires awareness of Savannah's public schedule. That awareness was available. Her return to the Today Show was announced through multiple media sources in the days prior. Tracking it required monitoring public news about this case and about Savannah's professional activities. Where this encounters difficulty, introducing a third distinct actor requires explaining how they have information they could credibly claim to possess about the body's location. Each of these three scenarios produces the same analytical observation about April 6th. The timing requires an explanation that is most precisely accommodated by a communicator for whom Savannah Guthrie's public visibility was the primary timing variable. Not the ransom operation's internal clock, not an arbitrary day in the middle of a week, the specific first day back. Behavioral analysts who work with threatening and extortionate communications in high-profile cases look at 5 specific dimensions of communications that most public coverage does not reach. The first is audience identification. Not the nominal recipient, the outlet that receives the communication, but the real intended behavioral target. The person whose response the communicator is trying to shape. In ransom cases, the nominal recipient is just the delivery vehicle. The intended target is whoever makes the payment decision. But in this case, communications consistently go to media rather than to the family. The behavioral target of a communication sent to a media outlet is not the family. It is whoever is watching. On April 6th, a very specific and identifiable person had just returned to a national television audience of millions. That person is the behavioral target that April 6th produces. The second is impact design. What specific response is the communication designed to produce? Ransom language, deadlines, amounts, consequences, is calibrated to produce payment compliance. The April 6th communication contains no payment demand, no deadline, no mechanism for a transaction. It is not designed to produce payment. It is designed to produce an emotional response. Specifically, the response that the phrase body location produces in a person who has been living in uncertainty for 65 days about whether their loved one is alive on the specific day they are required to be publicly functional for the first time. That is not financial pressure. That is targeted emotional impact. And emotional impact as a communication objective serves a fundamentally different purpose than payment compliance. The third is timing behavior. In operational ransom communication, timing is governed by internal requirements: initial contact, deadline establishment, deadline pressure, consequences. Transaction-driven. In the April 6th communication, timing is event-driven. An external public event is the variable, not a day that makes sense within the internal logic of payment negotiation. A day that makes sense within the logic of someone who was watching, who was tracking public events, and who selected the day of maximum public attention for a specific, highly visible person. The fourth is operational footprint. To send a communication timed to Savannah's return to television, the sender needs to know when the return was scheduled. That scheduling was publicly available. Tracking it required active monitoring of public news. Active monitoring of a specific public figure's professional schedule, combined with timing communications to align with moments of that figure's maximum visibility, is a behavioral signature that investigative literature associates with specific categories of targeted behavior. The fifth is escalation architecture. Ransom communications follow a specific escalation pattern: initial demand, deadline, pressure, consequence, negotiation, resolution, or abandonment. Transaction-driven escalation. The communication record in this case follows a different pattern: initial demands to media, silence after deadlines, weeks of additional silence, then a new communication on a day of maximum public visibility. The escalation is driven by external visibility events. That is a different escalation architecture, and a different escalation architecture reflects a different underlying motivation. Together, those 5 dimensions produce a behavioral profile that is inconsistent with financial ransom motivation. It is consistent with communication governed by a motivation that is fundamentally about impact on a specific person. There is a specific cognitive error that has operated across 65 days of public coverage of this case: category persistence. Once a communication is categorized, all subsequent communications connected to the same case get interpreted through the established category. The first notes arrived in February and were categorized as ransom communication. The FBI confirmed they were genuine. That confirmation cemented the category, and every communication since has been processed as a variation within the ransom framework rather than as potential evidence of a different category altogether. The April 6th note is not a ransom note. It contains no payment demand, no deadline, no mechanism for a transaction. Interpreted as a ransom note, it is anomalous. A ransom note that has abandoned the essential mechanics of ransom. Interpreted as a targeted messaging communication, it is coherent. The timing makes sense. The language makes sense. The audience selection makes sense. The absence of payment mechanics makes sense. The cognitive work required to revise the category is higher than the work required to call it an anomaly and move on. Behavioral analysis corrects this by examining each communication on its own behavioral terms, rather than through the category established by the first communication. When you do that, the April 6th note does not look like a ransom note. It looks like a message, sent to a specific person, on a carefully chosen day, designed to produce a specific kind of impact. Here is what we can confirm from the public record as of day 65. A new communication arrived at TMZ on April 6, 2026, the same day Savannah Guthrie returned to national television after 64 days away. The communication claimed the sender knows where the body is. It contained no payment demand, no deadline, no transaction mechanism. Its relationship to prior communication streams, whether it shares a Bitcoin address with the kidnapper notes or the informant notes, has not been publicly confirmed. The original ransom notes are confirmed by the FBI as genuine. Both payment deadlines in those notes passed without follow-through. The informant stream has been communicating separately for 65 days, has claimed Nancy is deceased, and has offered location information in exchange for Bitcoin payment. Here is what the behavioral analysis concludes with confidence. The April 6th timing is not consistent with operational ransom communication logic. It is consistent with communication that was tracking Savannah Guthrie's public visibility as a primary variable. The language of the April 6th communication is not consistent with active ransom negotiation. It is consistent with communication designed to produce emotional impact rather than financial compliance. The behavioral profile produced by the combination of timing, language choice, and audience selection is more consistent with targeted psychological messaging than with any form of ransom transaction. Here is what cannot be determined from the available public record. Whether the April 6th note shares a Bitcoin address with prior streams. Whether the FBI is treating it as connected or as a new actor. Whether the location claim contains specific verifiable details that investigators can assess independently. If a subsequent communication arrives after another period of silence, and arrives on another day when Savannah's public profile is at maximum visibility, that pattern will no longer require a probabilistic argument. It will be a documented behavioral regularity. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can be submitted at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. If you know someone who was tracking this case's public events with unusual attention, who had access to information about the case they shouldn't have had, who behaved differently on specific days when the case received maximum public coverage, call. I want to hear from you in the comments. Does the April 6th timing change how you categorize this communication? And if a subsequent note arrives on another day of maximum public visibility, does the pattern tell you something specific about who is sending it? Subscribe to the Obscure Report and turn on notifications. The behavioral record is accumulating. Timing is data, and the data is pointing somewhere that the ransom framework alone cannot explain. April 6th, day 65. The first day back on national television. A new note claiming to know where the body is. The ransom framework calls that an anomaly. The behavioral framework calls it a message. The difference between those two interpretations matters more than anything else in this investigation right now.